Hi, this is Michael Hicks. Welcome to Blue Room Archive. This is the first of a series of episodes in a podcast dedicated to, well, think about the initials for Blue Room Archive: books, records, and artwork. Today, I'm going to have a fun time with you. I hope it will be fun for you. And this, if this ends up being our only episode, it will be a masterpiece, I promise. Um, but I want to talk about the Doors and me. Let me start with this poster. This is a poster for the Northern California Folk Rock Festival, May 18th and 19th, 1968. And in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about that event and how it relates to the URL www.doors.com. So that will be the big reveal at the end. Now, I was 11 years old, 1967. I loved the Doors, and the big Doors hit was Light My Fire. We heard it, a real short version, on AM radio, but we like to listen to FM radio because that's where you got to hear the long version of Light My Fire. Let me show you how that went. It had, Light My Fire was like no other record before that. It had this sort of Bach organ solo at the beginning, and then it went into this interesting verse. Well, interesting this way. So it was not interesting in some ways because the melody line was, "You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar if I was to say to you, girl, we couldn't get much higher." Not much distinguished in the lyrics, obviously, and the melody, not much. But what was interesting about it was that the chords went, "You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar," and so on. So it was this interesting alternation of chords that were a third apart, and they're both minor, and so on. I won't get into the theory of that, but it was quite striking. And then, if you listened to the long version, the one that's on the album, the one that got played on FM radio, not AM radio, it was about 7 minutes long, and it had a long, several minutes solo section. Started with an organ solo, and then the guitarist Robbie Krieger playing this sort of flamenco-ish guitar solo, and then the two of them playing together. And the entire middle section was, the bass line going do 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 do. It was a hypnotic induction, basically. It was just that thing over and over, the same do 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 do, and so on. Now, then it would go back into the verse and then back into that organ intro thing, sort of Bachian, and it ended. Very strange track. We loved it. Now, I was going to Kepler's bookstore all the time back then, and they had handbills or postcards on a table in the sort of back of the store to tell people about different concerts that were coming up, mostly things at the Fillmore Auditorium or the Avalon Ballroom up in San Francisco. And one day I go in and there's a stack of things for this music festival. Now, the music festival, it was a pretty new idea. This is a year plus before Woodstock, okay? This is almost a year after the Monterey Pop Festival, which is a very big deal because you had the Monterey Jazz Festival and you had Newport Folk Festival and so on. But to have a pop festival is a very big, unusual thing at the time. And this was called the Northern California Folk Rock Festival, May 1968. And one of the headliners, the one on Sunday, not Saturday, was the Doors. Well, my birthday was May 22nd. So I talked to my parents into letting me go to that concert with my friends Larry and Hokey. Hokey was nickname for Horace. We got tickets. I was still 11 years old at this time. They opened the gates. It was just open fields. This is at the Santa Clara County Fairgrounds, where I'd been many times to the fair over the years as a boy. We were spry at that age. We ran to the front, got as close as we could to the stage. There was a fence, between the crowd and the stage where they let journalists and groupies basically hang out in that space. And I could talk about the whole event, the whole concert, and it is described in some detail in this latest book of mine called Wineskin Freakin' Jesus in the 60s and 70s. But I won't read you the account there. I invite you to buy the book, of course, and read it yourself. But I'll just say that when the Doors came on at the end of the day, we'd sat through 5 hours of other groups, and some were great and some were just okay. But it had been a little bit overcast all day. Jim Morrison comes on stage after the group has set everything up, and the clouds roll in and darken. And he steps onto the stage and it starts to rain. And he goes, "Make it wet! Make it wet!" And we were scared out of our minds. Who is this guy? What is this? Is he magical? What supernatural powers does this guy have? Well, anyway, I'll just say 2 other things about this particular performance. It was a great set of Doors tunes. He was a little strange as he was then. Was he on drugs? Was he drunk? Or was he just a showman? Hard to tell. But he, during the solo section of Light My Fire, sat down just in a heap as though he were catatonic inside the bass drum, which did not have a front cover on it. And when the solo section ends and there's this down, 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 that was sort of the signal for, okay, we're about to go back into the verse. He leaps up, grabs the microphone and starts yelling, "Fuck, fuck, 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 fuck." And again, it was like, okay. And so there was that event, which was fairly startling. And also, during another song in the set, I believe, he fell down. He just fell over on the stage, kind of tripped but he held the microphone and he's laying on the stage and he's singing with his eyes ablaze, the top of his lungs. He just kept singing. I mention that to you so you'll understand the aftermath of this. So it was a fantastic event for me. I loved it. I was ready to turn 12 years old. And the reporting on the event was not so positive. This was the headline here in the review by the San Jose Mercury News, the paper of record down there. 16 hours of rock in dismal surroundings. And there's just a short paragraph on the Doors. Yesterday, a relatively short-haired Jim Morrison, he had actually cut his own hair, so it was a little bit jarring, looked a little different than we were used to. Jim Morrison, with the Doors, in his usual demagogic way, worked the crowd to a screaming pitch. Now, there was a new newspaper up the peninsula from us in San Francisco. It's called Rolling Stone. It just started up at the end of 67, I believe. And they had a little report on it, but the main feature was a 3-photograph set that looked like this. And it was that fall of Jim Morrison's. And if you want to understand the sort of contempt that the highfalutin rock press had for the Doors at that time, and particularly for Morrison, you can see here the headline says, "Much Ado About Nothing," or "Humpty Morrison's Great Fall." He was not a favorite of the press. Now, I want to leap forward from that great event in my life as an almost 12-year-old, 17 years. Okay, so it's 1985. I have been to high school, I've been to college, I've been to graduate school. I am in 1985 a doctor of musical arts, and I've just gotten my first professorial job in composition, kind of weird, avant garde, out there stuff, way beyond anything the Doors ever did. That year, my first year as a professor at BYU, this video came out from the Doors. It was a collection of videos. It was a VHS called Dance on Fire. And I got it, and I just thought, look, I was looking through it, enjoying it, sort of the memories, reminiscing, and so on. And in the middle of the song Love Me Two Times, they start showing footage from that Northern California Folk Rock Festival of May 1968. And it's like, wow, I was there. And at one moment, the camera, which is on Morrison on stage, swings out like a pendulum onto the crowd and then back onto Morrison. And so I went frame by frame. I knew that we were sitting very close to the front of that crowd. I thought, am I going to be in there? And indeed, for just a moment, you couldn't blink. You'd miss it. But there was me between my best friend in yellow here, Larry Priest, and my other best friend that I was actually going to do some concertizing with later on, Hokey Hill here. And that's me. Now, you only see my hair because I was bent down, because my other birthday present was a new Polaroid Swinger camera. It was a really cheesy little mini black and white camera, but it was Polaroid. And I had a stepfather at the time that was really into Polaroid cameras, so he thought this was great. And so I was loading stuff up to take pictures of Jim Morrison. So it's like, there's my documentation. There I am. There's my two best friends near me. So I was kind of excited, and it set me on a path of doing a little more collecting of Doors stuff, just again reminiscing and so on. I picked up this press release from 1987 of here Ray Manzarek and John Densmore of the Doors in a promo shot for their new release of the Doors live at Hollywood Bowl. Now, remember that Morrison had died along with Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, the sort of trinity of deaths, during the Nixon administration. So he'd been gone for 15-ish years. And so when I got my first signed LP by the Doors, it's signed by John Densmore, Ray Manzarek, and Robbie Krieger, not Jim Morrison, of course. Autographs from Morrison, very rare, and so on. I never had one. Maybe someday I'll get one. But so I did acquire this as well. And I acquired also a mono copy of the original Doors album. And these are quite rare, the mono copy. It doesn't sound all that great, but mono was a variant that was unusual at that time. So 1990, I'm at the national meeting of the American Musicological Society, there with some other scholars, and it was in Oakland, California, had the nice Bay Area vibe to it. And rock scholarship was kind of making it into the academic scene. And so a bunch of younger scholars were getting together to consider creating an anthology of chapters about different groups or different techniques in rock. And I was there, and I was invited to be part of it, and I had come up with the concept. I wanted to do a thing on Steely Dan, and then I changed it later to garage rock. And after some discussion, I decided, I want to write my own book. I want to do my own book about the music of the 60s that I really loved, that I had so much affection for, and really try to analyze it, get into why did I like this music so much? So I started writing things up, and one of the first things I did was start collecting tapes of the Doors playing live. So I wanted to do, as a chapter in my book, a study of the evolution of Light My Fire, how it came together as a recording, because there's some interesting history there, but also how the group played it live over the years, the relatively brief period of years that they were playing it in concert, maybe 3-4 years. So I saw an ad in Discovery's magazine, a record collector's magazine. Someone had placed saying, I have recordings of Doors concerts, cassettes, and write to me in New York and purchase them. So I did that. And they're okay, they're helpful, but it was supposedly all the known live Doors concerts bootlegged onto cassettes. Well, a couple months later, after I'd been working on these, transcribing the solos and so on, and enjoying the experience, but being very meticulous, I read another ad in a different magazine from someone running something called the Doors Collectors Club. And I saw that the address for this was in Orem, Utah. It was actually just a mile from where I lived here in Provo, Utah. And I thought, this is weird. So I contacted Kerry, who ran the club, went to his house. I told him about the cassettes I had, and he said, oh yeah, those are all dubs of mine. I have better versions of those, earlier generations of those tapes. And I said, well, can I buy them from you? He says, you can't buy them. It's against the law for me to sell them, but I can trade them. So we worked out some trades. And I ended up, between the old cassettes and the new ones, substituting a lot of the new ones, with all these cassettes. He said, well, here's some shows you don't have. And as far as we know, I got recordings of all the known live concerts on tape of the Doors at that time. There may certainly be more now. And I started going through and analyzing them. I'll just show you. Here was Kerry's Doors Collectors Club sort of logo there. That has a lot to do with the Doors and Lizards, and there's a big connection there. That's another thing you can look up. So I finished this up, analyzing them all, wrote about the history of it, and submitted as a paper to the journal American Music. And American Music was a journal published by the University of Illinois Press. They had published an earlier book of mine called Mormonism and Music, A History, and my second book with them was about to be 60s rock, garage, psychedelic, and other satisfactions. I'll show you that in just a minute. So I did this, I wrote all this up into a proposed article for the journal American Music, submitted it, and they rejected it. They said, it's not that good. I mean, the writing and so on was fine, the analysis was fine, but the topic just wasn't really of much interest because, again, sort of bias against the Doors and so on. So I took it in stride. I worked on it a little more. It became a chapter in this book of mine, 60s rock, garage, psychedelic, and other satisfactions. This picture on the cover is of the group The Music Machine, whose 1967 hit Talk Talk, one of my favorites of the era. And if we had time, I'd tell you about when lead singer Sean Bonnewell, who sang Talk Talk and other things, called me up after midnight one night here at the house to talk to me about the group. It was a very surprising event. This is the paperback version that came out a year later. And the chapter in here is called Playing with Fire, quote unquote, fire. And it analyzes, as I said, all the different solos, gives the history of the making of the track and sort of how it mutated over the years. So one of the paragraphs says this: when the Doors recorded their first album in September 1966, they made a long, energetic take of Light My Fire, the closing song of the first side. For some reason, however, the producers slowed the recording down slightly, lowering the key almost a half step and deepening Morrison's voice. This slowing exacerbated some confusion about the song's duration. The record label and record jacket printed the duration as 6.5 minutes and 6 minutes 50 seconds, respectively. The actual playing time was 7 minutes and 5 seconds. The real length of this take of Light My Fire, however, based on speeding up the record slightly to regain the original pitch level, is approximately 6 minutes 45 seconds. That's how meticulous I was about this sort of stuff. So I thought it was an interesting sidelight, but somewhere over the next several years, after the book came out in its second edition, 2000, I thought, I want to pursue this a little bit. I thought, well, I'm just going to email Bruce Botnick, who was the original recording engineer of this, and see what happened there. In the meantime, I had spent some time talking with our BYU recording engineer, John Holloman, and he and I came up with some theories of how this had been slowed down. It made a big difference when you sped up the track to the original speed. Now, I knew it was the original speed because all the live recordings had it at the right key, the right pitch, the same thing as the sheet music of it. And I'll just show you the difference here. When I played it before, I went, "You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar." But the sheet music and so on had it here. "You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar." Well, just that difference between do, 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 especially when Morrison sings, "Come on, baby, light my fire." It's quite different from "Come on, baby, light my fire." Like I say, it's sort of like Elvis of the I Can't Help Falling in Love phase versus the Elvis of the Love Me Tender phase. And I loved the speed and the extra energy of this thing being at the right pitch. I think some of the appeal of the slowed down version actually was that he sounded a little bit sedated. And in an era of, Quaaludes and lots of sedatives, as well as, amphetamines. So it was sort of interesting to have that little bit of distortion. Well, I wrote to Bruce Botnick, explained this to him, and he took some interest, and we started corresponding. Contacting Bruce Botnick led to a long string of emails. I'll just hold this up. Here's a printout of them. I told him I was going to write a paper on this and present it at a meeting. So this was not the thing that I'd submitted to American Music before, but I wanted to really nail down, how did this happen? And he took some interest in it. And of course, I think that there, in his eyes, and maybe some others, there are some dollar signs lighting up, because you reissue the speed corrected version and suddenly there's a whole new tide of sales happening for that initial album. Well, anyway, we went back and forth on it, and he was quite interested in it. We sort of came up with some solutions to how this happened, and then he mentioned along the way, he said, this was in November of 2003, he says, "I'm about to prepare this in a speed-corrected version for surround sound and so forth, not an actual reissue of the album on CD, but a little bit more high-tech." And he says, "A great deal of discussion here amongst us regarding tampering with history, etc." And it was a big deal, because suddenly this album was going to sound quite different, particularly in that, monolithic track. So finally, he works on it in 2004. He writes me, this is in May of 2004. "Dear Michael, hope this spring finds you well and eternal." This is very Bruce. So, "Tomorrow, Thursday, May 6th, a day that will live in sonic infamy, I will be preparing the Doors studio albums for surround mixes. In the process of transferring EKS 74007, The Doors, that's their first album, we will be checking pitch for each and every song and resolving them, if necessary, during the conversion process. from analog to digital, etc. They're going to do the same thing with all the other albums, but there wasn't really problems with those like there was with this. It will be the first time since 74004 was recorded that anybody will hear it at the correct pitch and speed. And then he gets fanciful here. This could possibly cause a revolution. Women and children will be running through the streets into the forest, and everybody knows that it's impossible to see the forest for the trees. I've not gone mad, just thought that you might like to know that it's happening. I will be documenting every step of the way and will copy you with my observations. Very sweet. And I thought, man, this is great. I'm actually seeing some headway. I'm going to get my new versions of it, so on. Well, he finished it off. It was issued in a box set initially in 2006, I think. And I never got a copy. He kept saying, oh, yeah, I've got a copy here. I'll have to send it to you. Well, anyway, in 2007, I went to the local Borders here, records, mostly then CDs and books and so on. And I'm flipping through the different sections of recordings, and I see this, the Doors CD. It's a new issue. And I thought, oh, this is the one. And so I took it up to the counter and I bought it. And the woman at the counter says, oh, I love the Doors. I love that album. I said, well, I said, I'm buying it because I got it speed corrected. This is the new version of it. And she goes, wow, it's so incredible. So I had to buy it, and I pull it open, and there's the insert. And of course, the inserts kind of naturally fall open to their middle page, which is not happening here. So I pull out the insert, and I open it there in the middle, and look, here is Jim Morrison at the Northern California Folk Rock Festival, May 19th, 1968, in the center. And I thought, yes, that's my event. Then I turned to see what Bruce has to say about this in the liner notes. And here, because the print is so small, I'm going to actually get my magnifying glass here to read you most of what he says here. In red letters, it says warning. And then it says, this isn't the same album you've been listening to for the past 40 years. Well, actually, it is, and it isn't. So don't get freaked out. Play it loud and enjoy and revel in the renewed experience of the Doors as they were originally intended to be heard. And then he explains some of the background of the recording. And he says, as they were preparing this, he says, we noticed that something was wrong. The most startling discovery was finding out that the album, as it has existed on the street for the past 40 years, is running slow and off-key, flat to be exact. It came to my attention in early 2003 via an email from Michael Hicks, professor of music at Brigham Young University. After much investigation and speculation, Professor Hicks came to the conclusion that something was not quite right. In preparing for a lecture he was giving at the Society for American Music Conference in April 2003, he said, and then there's a long quote, big paragraph from my paper that he had read along the way, describing how this happened. And I won't get into that here, but you can read about it there. Well, it was a fortuitous time for me to get this news because in the fall of 2006, right before this came out, I had been appointed by University of Illinois Press the editor of the journal American Music, the one that had turned down my paper on the evolution of Light My Fire so many years earlier. So I was beginning that new section of my career. And all of the presentations of Light My Fire in digital format, like this one about this show that was about the album, never mentions the speed correction, but it plays it at the correct speed and so on. that's the way you hear it now. And I've thought so many times, how could that 11-year-old kid have known that this track that he loved so much and this group that he went to as though to a pilgrimage, to hear in concert, that he would one day be the reason that album got corrected and fixed so it sounds like they originally, as Bruce says there, intended it to be heard. Well, that's my story, except I did say I was going to tell you about how that poster that I showed you relates to www.doors.com. That poster that I showed you is not the poster that I bought in 1968. I don't even know what happened to that one. This poster is one I got from Carrie, my friend at the Doors Collectors Club, who had bought the remaining stash of unused copies of the posters years earlier. And he sold it to me. It's grown in value over the years. I bought it from Carrie. Well, Carrie's instinct was very good when it came to the front end of the World Wide Web. He bought the domain name www.doors.com as the place to go to for the Doors Collectors Club, which he ran. So if you wanted anything Doors-wise, memorabilia, recordings, anything, he wanted to be the source of it. So here's this guy in Orem, Utah, who owns the domain name www.doors.com. And as you might imagine, the group The Doors wanted that. And he said, you can't have it. It's mine. I need it. So they came up with their own domain name, thedoors.com. Works fine. And so my purchase of that poster you saw came from Carrie, who owned the domain name www.doors.com. Now, the epilogue to that is I ran into him at a thrift shop just a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And I said, so are you still running the Doors Collectors Club? He says, no, I'm kind of getting out of that. I'm doing a lot of stuff on eBay and Amazon with a lot of rare books and so on. And he still did some Doors stuff, but he kind of migrated away from it a little bit. He was completely immersed in it for so many years, broadening his work now. And I said, so do you still own the domain name? He says, no, I finally gave it up. He says, I got the proverbial offer I couldn't refuse. And I said, so from the group, they wanted to buy that from you? He says, no, actually, it was a company that sells doors. And so you could type in doors.com and it would take you to a door vendor. Now, if you do that, you type in doors.com and it will reroute you to doorsforhome.com. That's I don't know if it's the same company or what, but doors.com takes you to that. And if you want to reach the group, see their website, it's still thedoors.com. So that's the connection. Anyway, I hope this sort of stream of consciousness journey through my life with the Doors, I'll put with, I guess, in quotation marks, has been fun and maybe valuable in some weird way to you. Now, in our next episode, we're going to be talking about the Grateful Dead. But I'm not going to be talking about their music, and I'm not going to be talking about being a deadhead and traveling around. But I'm going through the Grateful Dead into the psychedelic artwork of that era. So I'm looking forward so much to seeing you again. I hope you're looking forward to seeing me. So Michael Hicks from the Blue Room Archive. See ya.